All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Dan Beaudry. I work for QS and we're about to get started with our EduPartner Forum. Okay, so in the interest of time, we want to jump right in. Thank everybody for being prompt to our first session. So this again is the EduPartner Forum 2021. My name is Dan Beaudry. I represent Move On Software for QS in North America. And I'm delighted to welcome you to our discussion here about managing partnerships in higher education. We are delighted to be partnering with the CBIE International Relations Professional Learning Committee to deliver this event to you. We've got a great afternoon of content coming up. This is really, I guess I can't call it an emerging space anymore because over the past several years, there's been a lot of growth in this community. But I think recently we've been good about bringing people together to share ideas and to improve this space, specifically within partnership management. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea Morrow from CBIE to kick us off, but have a wonderful conference. We'll be here alongside of you all the way through. Just a couple of housekeeping things before I do turn it over to Andrea. You may notice that you have control over your own mute button, and that's good. We want you to have control, but we also want you to keep an eye on that too. If you find yourself being muted, that's our doing, and we reserve the right to do that if we need to. But certainly we want you to engage as well. So don't be bashful about unmuting and engaging for our breakout sessions and also to ask questions. So without any further ado, actually, before I do turn it over to Andrea, I would like to introduce not just Andrea, but the rest of our hosts for today. So obviously I'm there, but also Janine and Sarah. We've all four of us been working together to bring this to you. And it's really exciting to have folks from different organizations to put together the agenda that you're going to have here. So Andrea, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dan. And I really just want to thank you and QS for allowing the International Relations Professional Learning Community to partner with you again. I know that the University of Calgary has been using Move On for quite some time, and we really find it key to help develop and manage our partnerships. But I think you hit on it when you were talking. Really, in addition to the excellent database that you provide, we really appreciate that you've been bringing professionals together for events like this today. So given some of the synergies, Dan and the International Relations PLC, or IRPLC, have been collaborating in a few events. So we hosted the event last summer in response to COVID-19 and have been working with Dan on some of our annual general meetings. And it's just been a pleasure. We look forward to continuing to work with you. Before we get into our next session, I just thought I'd give you a little bit more of a context on the IRPLC. We are a community of international relations officers in Canada whose work focuses on providing stewardship and leadership to their institution's internationalization strategy and partnerships. Our community brings together international relations practitioners to exchange best practices and ideas. So very much like today's session hopes to do, we just want to connect people. So if you're from a Canadian institution and you're not already a member, you can actually join in through the Community Hub. And my fantastic IRPLC colleague, Yukino, has put the link in the chat. We'd also like to encourage you today to continue the conversation using the hashtag INTLRelationsPLC. Before we get into our first session, I would like to take the moment to recognize that I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, Canada, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. For those of you who are not familiar with this practice, in recognition of our history based on colonization and imperialism, as well as a step towards our commitment to reconciliation, it's customary to offer a land acknowledgement by presenter for the land on which they're presenting the webinar. The land acknowledgement is a practice in Canada and around the world. Together with you, the participants at today's event, we acknowledge and respect the relationships and rights of Indigenous peoples around the world to their traditional lands, territories, waters, coastal seas, and resources, as described in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I'd now like to welcome you all to share your land acknowledgement in the chair box. For many of us, today's discussion on the importance of ethics and international partnerships is at the top of our minds. The pandemic has reminded us again of the deep-rooted inequalities in our society and has sparked social movements across the world. For my colleagues in Canada who are grieving their enormous loss recently discovered at the former Kamloops Residential School, we're reminded of our own histories, including the impact of colonialism and the horrific legacy of residential schools. My colleagues from the United States who've just honored the one-year mark of the death of George Floyd, we are also reminded of the continued struggles to challenge systemic racism and fight for racial equity and reconciliation. As we reflect on our own histories, I think it's really important for each of us to take the time and reflect about the work that we do as international relations practitioners. As practitioners, we really have the responsibility to build in ethics into our international partnership practices. But let's admit, it's often daunting and challenging tasks to take on. There's often a lot at stake and risks affiliated if we say the wrong thing or push back on partnerships that might not align with our values, but bring in revenue. Although these conversations and topics may seem uncomfortable at our times, it's our hope that we lean in and learn from others on how we, as international relations officers, can make changes in our practices. The first session today is really meant to be an opportunity for us to learn on how to bring ethics into the conversation from a very practical perspective, and really to provide us all with some tools to begin to look at partnerships with a critical lens. With this being said, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to our first speaker, who's not only a friend of mine, but a very valued partner at the University of Calgary, Farzana Karim Haji. And I have to admit, it was Farzana's holistic model for ethical mobility programs that really inspired this first session today. Farzana is the Director of University Partnerships at Aga Khan University. She's worked on various international projects in Egypt, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Syria, and Afghanistan, and has devoted much of her professional career to developing and strengthening academic partnerships. Now, I won't read her full biography, which is truly impressive, but we've included a link in the chat so you can find out more about her fascinating career and work there. Farzana will be taking us through a presentation titled Partnerships Rooted in an Ethical Framework, a case study and insights from the Aga Khan University. And then my co-chair, Janine Dennis Gonzalez, will help us guide through a series of questions that will help IR officers understand how we can approach partnerships differently. Following our conversation, we'll open the floor to questions and invite you to pose your questions throughout the discussion in the chat box. Over to you, Farzana.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all my colleagues joining us on today's session. Andrea, thank you for the kind introduction and for having me here today. I'd like to also thank Dan and the QS team for organizing this event, and to the Canadian Bureau for International Education, CBIE, and its International Relations Professional Learning Community, IRPLC, for putting together this afternoon's program and beginning a conversation on ethical partnerships and their value. I am joining all of you from the traditional land of the Coast Salish people, including the Duwamish people, past and present. Andrea, you mentioned the events of the last year and even more recently of the last few weeks, and these have not only sparked intense debate, but have really forced us to examine issues more critically and reflexively. I think it's also forced us to acknowledge what role we play and how we can be change agents in all of this. And while this space is provocative, I think it's also a window of opportunity, and it's where the most growth can happen. This applies to partnerships as well. And I see our conversation today as a starting point to build new models, push the boundaries, and really challenge the status quo. My presentation today is really looking at ethical partnerships from a Global South perspective. And I think what I wanted to do is give you some context initially on AKDN and AKU, the two institutions that I'm a part of, our vision, our ethical framework, some of our dilemmas of leading from the South, and then some key takeaways. I have to tell you, as I was preparing for this presentation and putting all of this together, what was very interesting is when I was Googling global ethical partnership frameworks from the Global South, very little showed up. And I thought that that in and of itself was very telling about the value of this conversation and where we need to go with this. So if I would start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Aga Khan Development Network. This is a network of integrated agencies. It is led by the chairman, His Highness the Aga Khan, who is not only the chairman of this network that works across 30 countries, but also the head of the Ismaili Imamate. And the entire goal of the AKDN is really a holistic approach to improving the quality of life of communities in Asia and Africa. And we do this through very integrated programming, be it economic, social, and cultural development, but also programmatic development. Underpinning the entire network are really our ethical values of pluralism, robust civil society, global citizenship, gender equality, environmental sustainability, as some of the few. And I think that this informs every single piece of our work as well as all the agencies. And if I were to show you the organogram, we are 100,000 employees, 30 countries, and the arms are developed. The AKDN is up into 3 arms. One is the economic development arm, the social development arm, and the cultural development arm. And what's interesting that I show you this model is that the interesting piece of this is that the economic development arm is our for-profit activities, and that extend from tourism and leisure to our industrial promotion services, to financial services, to media services. But the profits that are made out of this arm are reinvested back into our social development and cultural arms. In our social development arm, we have the Aga Khan University that you can see there. We have a sister university, but we also have 300 schools as part of our system, 27 hospitals as part of our system, an entire agency focused on disaster management and water and rebuilding, planning and rebuilding services. And then we have the cultural arm, where His Highness has really talked about how do you impact development also through culture? Culture is a big component. So we have historic cities programs that are about restoration, rehabilitation. We have an award for architecture. We have a music initiative that's really about bringing back a lot of the lost forms of music in many of the communities in different parts of the world that we work in. Moving next to AKU, as you saw, as one part of this huge network. We are a private not-for-profit university founded in Pakistan in 1983 with an international charter. And that's a picture of our campus in Karachi, Pakistan. And our goals were very simple. How do you educate high-quality leaders? How do you conduct research with purpose that's not only relevant, but accessible, but impactful and of high quality? How do you achieve world-class excellence? And how do you benchmark yourself to standards around the world? How do we serve local communities, low-cost solutions in communities with massive challenges? And how can we be a catalyst for change, again, in our local regions that we work in? And one more slide on AKU is that, a lot of people say to us, well, how do you do all of this? Well, we're a very small institution. But with our small institution, we are currently in 6 countries. So beyond Pakistan, we now have a charter in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda. We also work in Afghanistan, and we have one program in the global north in the United Kingdom, which is our Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations. You might say to me, well, you have a huge amount of faculty and staff. Absolutely. It's because we run tertiary care hospitals, and we have a lot of alumni who are now all over the world. But the impact of AKU has been tremendous, from our economic impact annually, which is $1 billion into the Pakistani economy, supporting nearly 42,000 jobs, but also our gender parity and our number of patients that we treat, as well as the number of teachers we train. And I tell you all of this just really to set a context and to show you sort of that everything AKU has done has really been through partnerships. Partnerships have been critical to AKU's growth from day one and continue to be. It's part of our strategy. It's part of our internationalization strategy, is really about developing strong ethical partnerships. But we did a review. This was about 10 years ago. And we realized very early on that while partnerships were incredibly important, partners did have diverse motivations and expectations. Partner policies and benefits were asymmetrical in nature. And there was a lot of positioning as the big brother. I mean, people say to me, what's the number one thing that you see on the ethical perspective? Is sort of a lot of our partners saying, we're going to come and help you. We're going to show you. We're going to bring our curriculum. You can implement it. And results as a result of all of these partnerships was very partner driven. How we focused, how we worked, again, very focused to our northern based institutional partners. And so we decided that, whilst we were recognizing all of this, we also recognized we had a lot to offer. We brought a lot to the table, and that we had been accommodating despite the risks. But we also recognized that we had been really ad hoc in our partnership approach. We ourselves didn't know what we wanted, and we weren't organized internally, and even with partners, we didn't have the framework. And so 10 years ago, we started the work to change our narrative. And how have we done that? By prioritizing what we wanted in partnerships upfront, identifying what we as an institution wanted, what our strategic framework was, how we were going to get there. The second thing we started doing was really understanding our value and our context. What did we bring to the table? What did we have? What are our assets? What were we putting up? What did we want? And then third, building our internal systems and processes. We realized that if we didn't have systems and processes internally, how are we even going to gauge the kinds of partnerships we wanted? And how are we going to communicate this internally to our faculty and our community environment and our community, our university community, but also externally to our international partners? And the fifth important part was how we wanted to become a partner of consequence. And when I say that, I meant having a seat at the table, being part of the important decisions and discussions that were happening with our international partners. And so this has sort of been our strategy over the last 10 years and has led us to what I call our ethical framework. And I have to tell you, this is a living document. This is something that we review, we change, we focus on, we look at, we evaluate constantly. It's not static, it's been quite dynamic, but has really allowed us to think about conditions of success and what do those look like? What does that mean? So the first two on the top, you see the foundational principles and you see the due diligence. These are the two pieces that we've looked at externally with our partners. And principles have really come to be appropriateness to vision and mission. Does a partner share that with us? Is there mutual reciprocity in this relationship? Is there trust and transparency? Is there good governance at the partner's level? But adding to that, what are our own principles? And those are really quality, impact, access, relevance. Do all of these apply within the partnership framework? The second piece has really been the due diligence, the longevity and the credibility of the partner. Are they reliable? Will this be a sustainable partnership? Is there a clear engagement pathway? Do we have communities of champions at the partner? Because we've realized, and we've had a lot of experience where you can be very gung-ho about a partner, but if there's no champion on the other side, the partnership is not going to go very far. Do we have a clear exit strategy based on our risk and opportunity? And a lot of times we've had to cut partners loose because we thought that the principles were there, but in the due diligence process, we've recognized that there were a lot of issues. And also mobilization of resources. That has been really important. A lot of partners say to us, yes, absolutely, we're willing to help you, put some money on the table. And that doesn't build mutual reciprocity. So how do we deal with that? We walk away from that? Do we stay in that? And this is where all the vetting happens. On the internal side, what we focus on is really accountability, creating partnership ecosystems internally and across the Aga Khan Development Network with our agencies to say, you know what, is there support for this? So you might have a great partner, a faculty member might bring a great partner to the table, but if the leadership is not interested, then that could be problematic. Or if the leadership is interested and the faculty are not interested, that can also be problematic. So having the conversations behind the scenes, but agreeing on proposals, sort of the program pieces and putting program documents together, but also systems and processes. Putting in an ethics review committee. We now have a partnership review committee that is chaired by the president that looks at all the partnerships that are feeding up that can be, big strategic institutional level relationships. So we've taken the time to really focus on our systems and processes. And the last one is performance. It's tracking and monitoring. We have realized that data is big. Data is going to play a huge part in how we evaluate partnerships, but how we look at performance metrics, but also synergy and integration. Is the partnership working? Is it not? Do we continue it? Do we cut it loose? And so putting this framework together and working on this has led us to what I'm really proud of on the progress made. And when we started this in 2008, we were very AKU focused. Fast forward a few years later, we have now become AKTN focused because we've realized the value of having an entire network behind us when we address partnerships has been quite successful. We went from unidirectional to being very clear that we want bidirectional, especially with regards to mobility, faculty movement, staff movement, student movement. We went from big brother relationships to being mutually reciprocal. We went from internally having duplication and overlap to saying, okay, let's put in the systems, let's put in the work here. Ad hoc to depth and breadth. And this has really consolidated the level of partnership and the value that we're getting out of our relationships. We went from transactional to transformative, MOUs to project agreements. You can sign a basic framework agreement, but exactly what are you going to do? Program agreements are sort of putting someone to the test, the metal, putting someone and holding someone accountable. Short-term funding to long-term funding. From short-term relationships to long-term relationships, and from limited funding opportunities to increased funding opportunities. We are getting requests from partners regularly saying, would you like to sort of work with us on this? Is this something that your team would be interested in putting in a grant for, a research piece for? And the lack of due diligence to what I've previously just described are conditions of success that has now really sort of formed our partnership strategy, but has allowed us to really look at partnerships more deeply, more cohesively, and more integrated in a more integrated fashion. That's all nice, that's all been said, but we've had to overcome lots of partnership dilemmas. Some examples for all of you. The big one being mobility. This has been the big game changer for us. When we started our partnership office, this was about 15 years ago, mobility was the number one thing that every single international partner asked us for. And so we set up an internship program and we said, absolutely, we will help partner institutions because they're giving us what we want, but this is something they want. And so let's set this up. And what was very interesting is that we set up this entire program and then quickly started to realize that partners, A, wanted to meet their numbers. B, partners were just sort of like, here, take the student, do what you need, and then send them back, and then that's it. And it was very much quantity driven over quality driven, and it was student led. The student had to sort of figure everything out when they came to us, and there was no sort of seamless transitions happening between the two institutions. And we sort of said, okay, we need to stop. We need to take a moment here and say, how do we need to change this so that it affects and improves not only the student's experience, but also the partnership with partner institutions. And we decided to flip the model. We asked institutions to be a part of the co-development, the co-planning process, from orientation to professional development sessions, to post-internship sessions. How do we, work with them to create policies so that the orientations were seamless, that it started at the partner institution and then continued with us? Timing was a big issue. We got a lot of pushback from partners who said, you know what, we can't send students for more than 3 months. And we said, you know what, on-site partnerships, 6 months or longer, we won't make any changes on this. And so it's been negotiation, but it's also been us standing up for what we truly thought was important for a great experience, putting the student at the center of all of this. And I've worked with colleagues at Western, with colleagues at the University of Ottawa on mobility, holistic mobility programs. And I'll share some of the resources at the end of this session for colleagues who are interested to learn more about these models. The second area, which I call specialty training, but the sandwich model, a big part of partnerships has always been like, you know what, we're here to help you. Send us your faculty who want to come for specialty training, or your postdocs or your PhD students who want to do some specialized work at our institutions. And initially we were doing that only to realize that we were losing a lot of these students. There was a lot of brain drain going on. And sitting with one of our partners, we decided we needed to try something different. And the partner in this case was Karolinska, where we actually said, how can we do this better? And we came up with what we now call our sandwich model that we've now applied to other partners to say, absolutely, a student should go for an international experience, but it should be flanked by time at AKU, co-supervision, joint research, and the ability for mentors to talk to each other, supervisors to talk to each other, faculty to talk to each other, students to be, again, seamless transitions. So building in connections to the partner, telling them what the expectation is, working with the partner institution to say, this is sort of the pathway the student will take at your institution, but with connections back to our institution. And as a result of this, we've created a lot of opportunities, but we've also realized in all of this that there was a lack of an enabling environment at AKU. So a lot of students would go for, highly specialized training, much of the techniques we didn't offer here at AKU. So how did we deal with that? So that's where the partnership model has come back. It's come full circle, where we've said to our partners, you know what, we do need some time at your institution, but hopefully the research will be very relevant to our context and focused here for comparative opportunities. And that has really worked for us. A third example is agreements. And here I have learned by example out of our office. When we first started looking at agreements, there were very North-based agreement templates to manage risk. We've now started developing our own set of templates to share with partners. And we've become very clear about protecting our resources and projects and building an accountability, as I mentioned before, through program agreements. Initially, there wasn't much room for flexibility around it. And we've said, you know, one example is on the issue of like jurisdiction and dispute resolution. A lot of partners would say, well, if there's a problem, it's going to be resolved in our state, in our country, in North America. We don't have any say we don't have any say in those jurisdictions. And so we've said, you know what, we'll get an international arbitrator that all of us agree on. We'll do it in a neutral country, and working with partners to say, will that work for you? And let's negotiate this space and let's see what we can do on that. We've also started internally really making staff and faculty aware of the agreement process and saying to them, these are some of the risks. How do you plan? How do you think we should deal with them? Making them part of the conversation rather than having them just say partnerships will deal with this, legal will deal with this, just get the MOU signed and we'll move on. But having them as part and parcel of the entire process. A last example is really on the research and data and leading ground up. We've had situations of data mining, data use without recognition, and it comes back to our systems and processes. We decided, yes, absolutely, we need clear IP guidelines, we need an ethics review committee, and we need to talk about this from our perspective and how does this impact within our government policies, the laws of the country, et cetera. One dilemma that we continue to face, and is something that we're still trying to navigate, is development priorities are usually driven by partners from the North. And in order to have meaningful conversations, it is important to have partners from the South as part of the context and part of the conversations. And we're working hard at that, but it's still an issue, still a dilemma. The other one is the research funding and the indirect costs. Many occasions we've worked with partners where we've gotten funding from the global North, where the North American partner will usually get, in some cases, and this is an example, 56% of the indirect costs, whereas AQ only gets 8%. And so our goal has been to make sure we're not losing money by building it into the direct costs and talking to the partner about sort of the inequity or the inequality in these policies and frameworks. I'd like to just take you now, sort of set the context, given you some examples, but some key takeaways in all of this. And then we can open this up to discussion and time for conversation. Everyone has a role to play. A lot of colleagues say to me, well, you guys are doing this, but in our institution, it's just the international relations officers. I think everyone has a role to play, from the president to the provost, to the senior academic leadership teams, to the faculty, even to the students and the staff. Everyone has a role to play in how we look at ethical engagement and having awareness on this. This is a long game. I've been doing this now for 15 years. I understand that this doesn't happen overnight. People change, institutions change, cultures change, processes change, and it's a matter of just sort of navigating and working hard and building this together. Breaking down structural inequalities also takes time and effort. A lot of our international relation policies are governed at the government level, and working through that takes time. But if everyone plays a role, everyone talks about this, we will start seeing changes. We already have over the last year in different aspects of policy. Understanding the value of partners. I cannot tell you how many times we have walked into meetings with international partners and people are like, what is this mom and pop shop doing here? Who are these people? What are they going to do for us? And after we present, everyone sort of sits up straighter in their chairs and says, oh my goodness, okay, these people have something to offer. So I think understanding the value of partners and what they bring to the table, listening and understanding, I think bears huge dividends. And the last thing is sharing best practices as a way to develop new models. A lot of what we have done and how we have done things has really focused on best practices coming in discussion with partner institutions, working jointly with them, not only on research opportunities, but also on presentations, panels, having the time and space to talk about some of the tough issues and say, how do we as universities work in this space, and how can we talk about things more effectively? I'd like to end my last slide of the presentation is really a quote from His Highness the Aga Khan that at a conference that he made on Central Asia and Europe, this was in Berlin in 2007, where he said, the key to building partnerships, whether they are among social sectors or among countries, is a profound spirit of reciprocal obligation, a readiness to share the work, to share the costs, to share the risks, and to share the credit. And in the end, what it will require most is a spirit of mutual trust. And we have found this to be incredibly relevant and sort of underpins the work that we have done. Thank you so much. I've put my email address up there. If anyone of you would like to contact me, get more information, etc., we're very happy to answer questions. And I'm going to turn it over. This is some resources. And again, we can share this after in the chat or even send this out to participants, some of the resources of some of the work that we've been doing at AQ with different colleagues. And I'd now like to, sort of end here and turn it over to my colleague Janine and open it up for questions. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farzana. Before I pass it over to Janine, I just wanted to really thank you. What a great way to end with the quote from His Highness, but also just to kind of for you to share some of your dilemmas and that journey that the Aga Khan University has taken in regards to partnership development. I would like to introduce my co-chair, Janine Dennis Gonzalez, who is the Partnership Development Specialist at the University of Ottawa, to take us through the question and answer portion of the session. Over to you, Janine, and thanks again, Farzana.
Thanks, Andrea. Hello, everyone. So now we're going to get the Q&A section of this session started. We have prepared a few questions for Farzana, but please feel free to write your questions for her in the chat, or if you'd like to submit your questions anonymously, you can send a private message through the chat to Yukino Mori, who is managing our chat today. So we have about 20 minutes for the Q&A, and we do hope to take a few questions from the audience, so please make sure to submit them. Okay, so the first question, I'll just pull up here. I think that it's actually a really nice segue, Farzana, from where you kind of left off in your presentation with the few takeaways that you left towards the end. So as you said, everyone has a role to play in changing these structural inequalities, and that takes time. But do you have any advice about how we as practitioners can be agents of change when it comes to pushing our institutions to really prioritize ethical and mutually beneficial partnerships?
Thank you, Janine. Absolutely. I think the first thing is people can frame this within their own institutional context. Everyone's institutions are different. Everybody has different ethics, has different principles that guide them. So I think the first thing is to really frame it in the context of university priorities and principles. We have really focused on systems and processes and our due diligence. And I think that's a second thing to prioritize, is to show senior leadership, the executive committees, the due diligence, and even the data. And I have to do a shout out to the QS team here for the Move On database, which Aga Khan University uses. And they have customized it for us to be able to show data and to show the impact of a partnership. And I think data speaks volumes to senior leadership. When you put out the data and say, this is a risk, this is what's happening, this is the value, this is what other partnerships have yielded for us, this is where we're seeing issues, I think that can be fantastic as a way to sort of get institutions to start prioritizing what we consider an ethical-based partnership.
Thanks, and that's a good segue. Just as a reminder to everyone that the following session is going to talk about evaluation of partnerships, so we can talk more about the data portion in a few minutes. And to kind of follow up on that question, now one of the anticipated barriers we could probably say to changing the way we approach this is resources. At many institutions, we have a lack of resources. And so do you have any advice on how your team balances the kind of quality and investment that's needed to forge these relationships versus the demand for output and efficiency from leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question, Janine, and one that we grapple with at AQ on a regular basis. And how we have dealt with it is that everybody wants partnerships. We all know that. I mean, constantly people knocking on my door saying, "Here's an MOU. Let's get this signed. Let's get this out." And everyone says, "Oh, there's going to be output and there's going to be outcomes here." What we have done is really focus on, and this is where time and resources become really critical, is we focused on core institutional relationships. What are the ones that are going to yield the most impact, the most value? So where is the strategic value? We keep tying this back to our strategy, back to impact, back to value. And we put it out, we say to senior leadership, there's 500 partnerships here. But these are the 5 that are going to yield the most value based on our criteria, based on our guidelines, based on our framework, and these meet our conditions of success. Now, these are the ones we want to really focus on. And you would be surprised at how much our senior leadership value those conversations, because what we've done is just shifted it from saying everybody and their mother wants to sign a partnership to these are the core strategic, this is a core strategy, this is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in terms to a relationship. And this is what we want to focus our energy and time on. And and we've now then been able to show value for this and show results as a result of that. And once you start showing results and impact, everything falls into place, and senior leadership start coming and saying to us, "Oh my God, I want to be a part of that partnership. I want access to that partnership." So it's a matter of changing the narrative internally and deciding internally as an international relations office, but then getting your top leadership buy-in on this to say, this is what we want to look at.
And that's interesting, because I know that there have been discussions recently about, whether strategic partnerships or partners of focus, these kind of things, whether it's, fair to use that. But I think it kind of is in line with what many of us are hoping for in our institutions, is really just to have more holistic and productive partnerships. And so, yeah, I think being able to highlight that with a few partnerships, like you said, it's a really nice thing to be able to offer leadership and have those results while knowing that, you're confident and happy with the full circumstances of that partnership. Okay, so moving on to another kind of series of questions that we have. Talking about our relationship. So, you mentioned that in the past, what you were seeing was a lot of asymmetrical partnerships that had kind of a big brother relationship. Now, from your perspective as an institution in the Global South, what could partners like my institution in the Global North be doing to better facilitate these mutually beneficial partnerships?
I think the most important thing that institutions in the Global North can do is really say, let's work on this together. Let's have some joint conversations. The number one thing, and I know that in our prep conversations, I think we talked about this, the number one thing that AQ gets a lot of is, I'm coming to help you. I'm going to show you how to do things. When we were setting up our medical college in 1983, we had institutions say, here's our curriculum, just implement it and you're good to go, high quality. But we realized very quickly, it doesn't work in our context. It's not relevant in our context. Some of the examples that were being used in the curriculum were all from a North-based perspective, and we've had to customize and tailor. So I say to partners, really take a seat at the table with us, have a conversation with us. And this came back to mobility. This has come back to agreements. This has come back to even specialty training. And it sounds very nice when we say we have a framework, but we've just broken it down and said on every single issue, how do we work with our partners and how can partners work with us? So even setting up a workshop in another part of the world. I mean, it's very interesting. A few years ago, we had an institution say to us, we want to set up an executive education leadership program with you. We want to partner. And we said, absolutely, we want to partner with you. And they said, okay, great. We're going to show up in Nairobi and we're going to bring our curriculum. And we said, you might know the content of your curriculum, but we know the context and we have our own content and we want it merged. And there was a lot of resistance, but when they did it, the faculty from that institution walked away from it saying, oh my God, that was amazing because we learned so much from it. Just as small as that changed someone's perspective and changed the output. So I think there's a lot to be said for having a seat at the table and allowing partners to have a seat at the table, but also being open to what partners in the Global South might talk about and might hear about.
That's really interesting. I love that quote. I just wrote it down for my notes. But yeah, I think that's really interesting because it's kind of, again, leveraging your role in the relationship and kind of for us in the Global North to remember that it's not all about us, you know, that you do have a very important role to play and you're bringing all of the context and knowledge there. And so, yeah, that was really interesting. So I have a kind of follow-up question to that. You know, you gave an example in your presentation where you said that the partner received 56% of indirect costs while AKU only received 8%. And so since we know that Western institutions often hold the purse strings in terms of funding, do you have any insights on how to acknowledge this power dynamic openly with our partners, but without letting it frame the entire nature of the partnership? Or to maybe change it?
That won't change for a while. I mean, we acknowledge that upfront, and AQ is very open about that and very transparent about that. And so are the partners who we work with. A lot of them are like, "Oh my goodness, this is an issue. We recognize it. We can't change the funding piece, but what we can change is what we are funding." So when the grant is out and we're looking, we say to everyone, you know, we want to be a part. Again, it comes right back to we want to be at the table when you're putting the grant together, not when you're halfway through the grant and you kind of go, oh my God, we need an international partner. Okay, let's call AKU and let's get them in. And then we sort of take a step back and say, is this worth it? Is this worth our time and energy if we have not been part of the planning process? We recently put in a big NIH grant with a North American institution. And what was amazing was that they came to us from day one and said, there's this huge grant and we want you to have a seat at the table with us, down to even discussing the title of the grant. Because initially the title of the grant was, you know, something in Africa. And we were like, Africa is a huge continent. Africa has over 50 countries within it. And we're talking about Kenya. So we need to change the title because there's an implicit bias in there. So even working at that level from the first moment to the time that we put the grant in was where our partners started saying, oh my goodness, yes, we didn't even think of that. Yes, we didn't even realize that. So just from that perspective is important. The indirect costs are not going to change, Janine. We understand that. The funding is coming from the Global North. And until we're able to be in that position, it's going to be like this. But what we can do is say to people, well, let's have a meaningful conversation about what the government of Canada is looking for in terms of funding priorities and what is of relevance, what's affecting the world today. A lot of the time, we're not part of any of those conversations. And that also happens, that again, as I said, the structural inequalities are there, they're happening at much larger levels. But if universities start talking about this enough, if enough universities start talking about it, if partners in the Global South start talking about it, you're going to see a lot of change. And it's slowly happening. It's slowly happening. We are being invited to sit at more tables.
And I guess that's kind of linking back to where we can be as practitioners, agents of change, maybe focusing a lot on this co-construction, making sure that we're giving our partners a seat at the table kind of at any level in the development of the partnership.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And so kind of following up on that then, I don't want to make things awkward, but I'm just curious if you have any examples of habits that institutions in the Global North or Western institutions have had that you think we're constantly doing that might be failing to change the way we approach partnerships or kind of undermining that goal of seeking mutually beneficial partnerships.
The savior complex. I'm going to come in, I'm going to help you, and we still get it. We still get it. I mean, we work very hard to come in to show people, as I said, a lot of times we've walked into institutions who don't know anything about us. And they'll just be kind of like as if they're entertaining. It's sort of like, okay, we'll take the meeting with them. Let's see what they have to offer. And at the end, they're like, oh my God, we want to work with you. It's the whole savior complex. It's like, I want to come, I want to show you, take our curriculum, our research, our faculty know how to do this. And now we're saying, you know what? No, we have as much to offer. This is what we bring to the table, and this is what we want. So now our partnership strategy is very focused on like everything we do with a partner will also have benefit to the AKU and to the AKDN, and not just to the partner. The partner, we see the obvious benefits and everything. They have access to new geographies, access to new populations, access to new data, to new research. But now we're saying, okay, for every piece we're putting out on the table here, we want our faculty to be recognized. We want them as part of the writing of the publication. I mean, before we never had those conversations. We were in a position where we're like, oh, do we want to say this? We might offend the partner. Now we're just like, what's your expectation? What do you want out of this partnership? And people are shocked because my job is to say, what is in it for you and what's in it for us? And by being very transparent and honest, I think people, if they don't like it, they walk away. And people who do like it are like, okay, we can work with this partner because this partner is going to be very straightforward. We've also had partners say to us, we're willing to help you, but put the $5 million on the table and then we'll come. And we've said that that's transactional for us. That's not mutually reciprocal. If we need it, yes, we will raise the money, we'll pay for it. And then that's not even a partnership. That's just a contract that we need somebody for. For us, mutually reciprocal is really about depth and breadth. We're trying to build permanent capacity amongst institutions to work together.
And that's where, I think the whole relationship piece really comes in. And that's what I'm kind of getting a lot out of from your talk so far today. At the end of the day, we need to have conversations. Like we need to be open. We're speaking to people on the other line and, to be open about what our expectations are and invite them to share theirs as well. And then, things can kind of be built around that.
Exactly. And those, I cannot tell you, Janine, and to all my colleagues here today, that has been a game changer. Actually having a conversation, even as much as a student coming on the mobility programs, having a conversation about a student who came to us and said to us, well, such and such university told me that I was going to get all of this and you haven't given me anything. And we called up the partner and said, we need to have better conversations so that we're all on the same page, because there's a lot of misinformation happening here. And after that, since we started having these conversations, we've never had a problem with a single student because everybody knows where they stand. It's as simple as that. I mean, that's a small example down to big examples, so I think it really comes from having open conversations, and that it's trust. It's also trust, and trust takes time to build. And it's a process. It's, as I say, it's a long game.
Thank you. Okay, and kind of, you mentioned the transactional relationship of this, but I'd like to kind of tie to the framework that you presented and kind of how you track and evaluate partnerships. I'm wondering if you have any examples of what's worked well, where there have been some challenges in your framework and how you're evaluating your partnerships.
So I know that in terms of transactional partnerships, we don't even consider those part of our transformative process. So what we've done is that we've just basically said, this framework encompasses the entire nature of the partnership. You can't have one piece here and one piece there. We're going to look at partnerships throughout this entire, our ethical based model, and we're going to vet partnerships as a result of that and have transformative focus on transformative partnerships. When we look at how we're evaluating and assessing, it comes back to where I think we have tried. It's still hard. Like I still struggle with partnership metrics, because sometimes partnerships are so different. How are we measuring and assessing and evaluating? But it comes down to producing data, like even being able to show data. I'll give you an example, which we've been doing through the Move On database is, take the data and let's see, look at our partnerships. How much money are we spending? If I'm spending $10 million on a partnership over the last 5 years, and I've only had like 2 research publications and 5 people go and no accountability, no performance on the projects, then what's going on here? There's something not right. Whereas if I have something where I've spent $1 million and I'm now seeing 100+ visits happening, I'm seeing research, I'm seeing things grow organically, already we're starting to assess that very differently. But putting our partnership metrics is something we still struggle with against our criteria. But we are looking at synergy integration as a big one. How is this partnership integrating across our campuses? How is this partnership achieving our impact, relevance, access, quality in everything, in all the projects that we're doing? Is the partner responding? Have we been able to have great benefit? Have we been able to raise money with the partner? Those are all sorts of things we track, and we're putting them into the system. And then now we're trying to visualize this data and saying, okay, is this working? Is our matrix working? Is our partnership framework working? And if it's not, what do we need to tweak? So it's a living model, but it is hard because this is something I'm struggling with even at AKU right now on how do we measure partnerships successfully because they're so different across the board. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I mean, I think you're speaking about some of the more qualitative aspects, like, is it going well? Do we feel that it's productive? And those are difficult to quantify. And often our metrics are very numerical. You want to assign a number value so that someone gets a score. And then, but it sounds like what you're kind of doing is working your framework around your values and your partnerships rather than the other way around.
Exactly. And they have to be together. You can't just take the numbers because the numbers might say something different. And then these guys could be the most unethical partners. And we haven't even acknowledged that. So if they meet that criteria, do those values still apply post 5 years? And if not, we always now are putting clear exit strategies into our planning. We never did that before. And then we're just like, oh my God, what have we gotten ourselves into? Now we're like, cut it loose and we have an exit strategy. We're able to walk away from partnerships. And again, be very honest with partners and say, this is not working. We are leaving the partnership. Difficult conversations, but ones that we are okay to have at this point in our maturity.
And I think that brings us to one of our questions posed in the chat. I think Leanne Constantine and Sarah Olson, our friend from Colorado State, they both had similar questions. And they were kind of, because you're talking about difficult conversations. And they're wondering kind of how you took steps internally to, with your larger faculty community to bring them on board, or if you had any pushback there.
Oh, I get pushback every single day, Janine. Every single day when I do partnerships, faculty are like, why? I mean, what's wrong? And so we now work with them through the due diligence process. And the due diligence process has to be done with the faculty, with the deans, getting some sign off. Now, I will also tell you, and I'm being very honest here, some people circumvent that completely and just say, oh, let's just go sign the document. But what we do is we ask the tough questions, which is why we have a partnership review committee where new partnerships are vetted and looked at. Existing partnerships are also reviewed, and we say, are they meeting their goals? But the internal, what we've done, and so this is an interesting strategy, is that we try and convince partners to work with our institutional partnership framework, our core partners, our anchor partners, you can call them. A lot of faculty don't. They want to work with their buddy at so-and-so. And if they work with them on an individual basis, we don't track, we don't monitor, it's faculty to faculty. If it's at the entity level, we hold the deans accountable and responsible. And when I say accountable, it's very nice to have someone sign off on a partnership. What are you going to do at the end of it? And coming back to that and saying, you know what, have you met those goals? And if not, why are we in this partnership? At the institutional level, we've tried to really role model. We've tried to show value. So a big part of my job is talking to faculty members, doing presentations to show what's working and what's not worked, and showing them the value of a partnership. And I think faculty like that when you can say to them, look what I can access for you from an international partner. You will have access to this. You will be able to do that. And that's when faculty are saying, oh my goodness, okay, let me test this. Let me try it out. Okay, let's see what you can do for me. Now, because you've built a trust-based partnership, you have access to different people, you know the international relations offices, all of a sudden doors start opening for faculty, and then they start looking at partnerships very differently. It comes down to value add. What are you adding? What's the value add proposition for faculty, for staff, for students? And that's what makes people tick. And we've kind of tried to figure out what the secret sauce is in all of this. And it's a value add proposition. If you can show faculty what you're going to get for them, what you're going to do for them, how you're going to help them, and how you're structuring this, and how you're going to make them look so good in all of this, people are like, I'll sign up, I'll do this, I'll work with it. It takes a lot on comms. We do a lot of communications. We do a lot of talking to people. We do a lot of sort of putting out articles, branding, really talking about partners, but it's coming. It's working. We're seeing the rewards and the benefits from this.
That sounds great. It sounds like, yeah, a kind of, you'd almost need like an internal communications plan
we do.
to bring people on board with this. Yeah. Okay, so I think we can, I just have one other question that hopefully we can answer quickly. If there's anything else that you'd add about how we can kind of, you know, I could acknowledge that there is still kind of some kind of nature that's a little bit transactional in seeking a mutually beneficial relationship, but that still maintains the ethical part. For you, would it be kind of having the conversations and the due diligence piece?
So, yeah, so it is fall in the due diligence piece. What we have tried to step away is transactional partnerships go against our entire model of what we call partnerships. And that's what we're trying to really sort of frame for colleagues on campus. The transactional piece is a contract, and then we look at it like any other contract. If you want it to be transformative, and if you want to say that this is a transactional partnership, then it falls under very different criteria. It doesn't even fall into our partnership framework of ethical base, because our ethical based things are all about longevity, credibility, sustainability. And now you're telling me that you want a one-off contract with somebody, or you want to do a one-off piece with them. That doesn't even fit into our definition. And so we've tried to sort of build that. Now, on the transactional pieces, yes, we try and look at the ethics of the partner. If partners are violating certain norms and stuff, we step away. We have it's our guiding principles, right? It underpins the ethics of the Aga Khan Development Network, and we follow that. And so we have no qualms to say we're not going to engage, even if the partner's like, I'm going to put $10 million on the table, which has happened. We walk away from that. It is against our ethical framework. We're just not even going to engage in that. And that means a loss? Absolutely, absolutely. So the transactional piece is reviewed in the ethical framework, but not as strongly, because it doesn't even meet the criteria of what we call our sort of ethical-based partnership model.
Okay. Thank you for answering that. I know it can be a tough question, but I think it's an important one.
Okay,
well, I think... well, we're not letting you off the hook that easy, no. So I see that our time has come. So I'd like to thank you, Farzana, for answering our questions, and to all of those who submitted questions today. Now, I know that we weren't able to address them all today, but we will be working with Farzana afterwards to provide some resources. She had a very complete slide that we'll share afterwards, and we'll look into some of those questions that we couldn't address. So as you will all have seen today, ethics in internationalization and international partnerships has been a topic that continues to surface in our conversations in the international relations professional learning community. And our group is really committed to leading these conversations. Last fall, for those who don't know, we hosted a virtual event on decolonizing international partnerships with Dr. Samia Chassi and Dr. Kumari Beck. And we're planning a follow-up event this fall so that we can continue these important conversations. We hope that you'll join us in this journey to learn together. So I want to thank Farzana once again for providing such a wonderful presentation today and answering many of our tough questions that have been on our minds. I know that I'm really thinking of ways to incorporate some of her tips into our partnership development process at U Ottawa, and hope that you all had something to take away as well. Now, as I mentioned, the IRPLC would like to invite our Canadian colleagues to continue today's discussion. You can join us on the Community Hub run by CBIE. If you're located outside of Canada, you can also continue the discussion with us on Twitter using our hashtag INTLRelationsPLC, and monitor our website to find out what other sessions that we're going to be hosting, including the one on decolonizing international partnerships in the fall. Before we end the session, I just want to thank our colleagues on the IRPLC, especially Yukino, who moderated the chat today, as well as the Canadian Bureau for International Education, CBIE, for your continued support. And finally, to Dan Beaudry and the QS team for inviting us to co-host the event with you today. So stay tuned for the next session, which will be a discussion on a very relevant topic, partnership evaluation, led by Sarah Olson from Colorado State. We'll see you after the break.
Thank you.
Thank you, Farzana. Thank you, Janine. And thank you, Andrea, for such a great session. We're going to go on break for 15 minutes, and then we're going to take a next step into our next session. So don't go too far away. All right, we'll see you shortly.